District. This is the special election for the seat vacated by former Representative David Wu, who resigned in August. On Tuesday, we talked to three of the top Democratic candidates. Today, we turn to the Republicans Rob Cornilles and Jim Greenfield. We'll talk to them separately because Rob Cornilles declined to appear with Jim Greenfield. We flipped a coin, and we start now with Rob Cornilles. 16 years ago, the Oregon native created a company in Tualatin called Game Face. It provides training and consulting for professional and collegiate sports teams and people who want to work for them. Cornilles also serves on numerous community boards. This is his second time running for Congress. He challenged David Wu in 2010. If you have questions for Rob Cornilles, our website is opb.org/thinkoutloud. Our phone number is 1-888-665-5865. Rob Cornilles, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Good morning, David.
Good morning. So, starting with some recent news from this week, the Congressional Budget Office came out with a new study that after-tax income for the richest 1% nearly tripled over the last 30 years, and for the middle class, which they defined as 20th to 80th percentiles of earners, it went up about 1% a year over that same period. An enormous difference in the economic fates of the richest and the middle class over the last 30 years. Is this a problem?
I think it is. I think this is one reason why we have so many people right now demonstrating their displeasure. It's one reason why people...
You're talking about Occupy Wall Street or Occupy Portland, or
exactly.
in general?
That's a great local example, and it's one reason why people like me have decided to leave the private sector, where I started my business, as you mentioned, 16 years ago, and actually run for office, because I don't feel we're getting positive results from those in elected office today. And Congress is broken, and one of the things that demonstrates it's broken is that we have this untenable high unemployment rate, where people are not able to build sustainable careers and thus prosperity for themselves and their family. It's very distressing, especially as an Oregonian. I see what's happening.
Why is it a problem, exactly, though, that the richest 1% are doing so much better over the last 30 years than the rest of us?
Well, that same report that you referenced also indicated that even those researchers at the CBO aren't sure why that disparity exists, but clearly it exists. And I believe, really, more than trying to dissuade people, or discourage people, I should say, from doing well, I think the American people are just more concerned that they themselves aren't going to be able to do well. And so I don't want to discourage people from excelling and succeeding, whether it be my kids, my neighbors' kids, whomever. But I want everyone to know that they have an opportunity as well to achieve prosperity, to start a business, to attend college and pay for those college bills, to be able to retire when they want to retire. And right now, this economy doesn't make it possible for most people.
So what should be done about that?
Several things. First of all, we need leadership. And as I mentioned, Congress is broken right now. We have so much fighting going on, so much partisanship, gamesmanship, and those who have grown up into the system, who have run for office and continue to graduate to the next level of elected office, if you will, I don't think we can afford more of that. More of the same is not going to help us. We need people who don't have agendas coming into office, and we need people who've actually met a payroll, like myself. I've met a payroll for 193 straight months with almost 60 employees in my business, and I have simple, basic principles that I abide by. And one of those things is, you know what, I know how to write a budget and stick to it. We haven't had a budget in Congress for 3 years. No wonder there's so much uncertainty out there. Because if we're looking to Washington for leadership, we're not getting it. And certainly in this district, as you referenced, Dave, we had a congressman who resigned, and for 12 years we haven't had that leadership, that effective voice.
But what specifically would you push for? You're talking about principles and leadership and sort of broad ideas of what you'd bring to Washington, but what exactly what changes do you want to see?
First of all, tax simplification. Right now, the tax code is so mumbo-jumbo, people can't understand it. At least small business owners like myself can't understand it, because it just continues to change, and the changes are temporary. For example, right now, we have a tax code whereby mega corporations, I'll use General Electric as an example, they make $14.1 billion last year, and yet they paid zero federal income tax. Yet I, as a small business owner, and those all over the first district, we don't have that kind of luxury. Why not? Because we don't have the resources to hire lobbyists and attorneys and accountants. So if we simplify the tax code by lowering rates and eliminating these crazy loopholes and these deductions and credits that the big corporations get to take advantage of, I think we'll see a greater fairness in the tax code. And that provides certainty and that provides predictability, which is necessary for business.
Are you saying these are loopholes that only corporations, large ones, can take advantage of, or they have the resources to somehow take advantage of them?
I think it's more the latter. Again, the tax code, it took 8 billion hours of American resources last year just for Americans to know how much they owed the government, because they can't figure it out from year to year. And it's not just taxes. You asked for other suggestions. We also, I think, as Oregonians, we want to protect our natural resources. We certainly want to protect each other. That's what regulations are for. At the same time, I join with the late Steve Jobs, who even said to the President Obama, we are over-regulated at this point. We need to return back to some normalcy in regulation.
So what are examples of some of the and in fact, I think we got a comment about this on our site. Chad says, what did you mean when you told OPB's April Bayer this week that you support reducing workplace regulations that govern treatment of employees?
Well, that relates to the healthcare law that was passed last year. And I've taken a lot of heat from members of my own party because I refused to sign the Repeal Obamacare pledge, which I think is just politics, frankly. I want to go back and do stuff. I want to get things done. I don't want to play games, which, frankly, is what the Republican House has done all this year. They had an opportunity to fix health care, to help lower costs, and instead they repealed something that never went past the House. So as a small business owner, when the government is telling me how I must ensure my employees, as opposed to allowing me with them to figure out the best plans, the best ways to provide them health care, that to me is just an overstepping of government.
Do you think that employers should be required or should have some role in providing health care to employees?
Well, we have to remember historically why it came up many decades ago. It's because originally it was a way to incent people to come join your company or your manufacturing plant. Should it be mandated? I don't believe so. I think everyone should be able to run their business the way they want to run it. And if someone chooses not to provide that benefit, they may pay the consequences. That being, people choose not to work for them.
Are there any provisions of the federal healthcare overhaul law that you support?
Well, certainly, I think that there's the coverage of kids, especially in this economy, who cannot afford health care on their own, so they can stay on their parents' plan.
They can now stay up to the age of 26.
That's correct. And I have 2 boys myself in college, and believe me, I'm really concerned about them when they get out of college, as far as what kind of opportunities they're going to have to be able to get a real good job, a sustainable job, in fact, a career, and thus pay for their own coverage. But I will tell you one thing about the health care plan that's especially distressing, is that it eliminated $500 billion from Medicare. And we have in Oregon nearly 250,000 seniors who take advantage of what they call Medicare Advantage. Nearly half of those seniors are going to be adversely affected by that cut to Medicare, which was part of that signature health care plan last year. And that gravely concerns me.
Are you not worried about the future viability of Medicare in terms of how much we're spending as a nation?
Absolutely I am. I think there are historically, people, because they paid into the system through co-payments and premiums, etc., it's largely been a self-financed program. However, as our population is rapidly increasing in age, and also as the healthcare costs continue to rise, now it's becoming unsustainable. And many smart people have suggested that by the end of this decade, Medicare will not be the way it is today. So therefore, we need people who are willing to go back to Washington, look ahead, not to the next election, Dave, but to the next decade, and ask themselves, how can we sustain this? And one of the things I've done in this community, I'm on the board of Virginia Garcia Memorial Foundation, which is a series of community health centers in Washington and Yamhill counties. It provides health care to low-income or no-income individuals and families. That particular model, the community health center, is something the nation should be emulating, because it's a way to pay for health care, not health insurance, mind you, but health care for those people who can't afford it entirely on their own.
We're talking right now with Rob Cornilles, the founder and president of Game Face, a sports consulting business, and one of the Republicans running in the primary for the 1st Congressional District's special election. The ballots have been sent out just a couple days ago. They're due November 8th. The general election is January 31st. The way into this conversation, there are two ways. 1-888-665-5865. Our website, as always, is opb.org/thinkoutloud. Chris Rames on Facebook asks, do you support the Occupy movement?
Well, anyone has the right in this country to express their displeasure, or their pleasure with what's going on in government or anything else. That's obviously a constitutional right we have.
That's what our Democrats a couple days ago said about the Tea Party movement, that they have the right to be there.
And we're both right on that. Now, here's the challenge.
But what about the aims, the political aims, as they're sort of coalescing, or at least sort of economic conversations that are coming up around the Occupy movement?
As I said at the beginning of our discussion, I think that the more the general public is aware of what's going on in Washington, D.C., and more specifically, the more they're aware of what's not happening in Washington, D.C., the better our country will be, regardless of what their political affiliation is, that being those people who want to express their opinion and their voice. But obviously, if your right to express your opinion is infringing on the rights of others, if you're breaking laws, that should not be permitted. We can't allow that. So we have to be lawful.
Has that happened in Portland?
Well, as I understand it, it has, but I can't cite specific examples. I just simply think, I think even today, the cost of managing that movement downtown is nearing $200,000 in additional police time. So that's a city issue, and I'm not going to get involved in city issues. I want to talk more specifically about what we in Congress can do to provide an environment so that those people who are displeased with our economic situation and their own economic future have something more positive to celebrate, as opposed to this 9.6 unemployment rate we continue to be in Oregon.
You've been criticized by your opponent, Jim Greenfield, for not signing Grover Norquist's No New Taxes pledge. Why haven't you signed it?
Well, because I don't let other people put words in my mouth.
I should add that only 6 out of 242 current GOP House members have not signed it. So you're in pretty rare company in your party.
So be it. I'm not running for a party. I'm running for a people.
Where do you put yourself in the current Republican Party then?
What do you mean, where do I put myself?
Where do you see yourself within the confines or the broad sort of goalposts of the Republican Party?
I'm not really one who sits and thinks about where I'd label myself or how I term myself, but here's
You are a Republican.
Absolutely, always have been.
So what does that mean to you?
To me, I think back of when I grew up in Oregon. I'm 47 years old, born and raised in this area, right here in the Portland community. I think back to when I was first starting to get interested in public policy. It was watching Mark Hatfield and his statesmanship and his ability to bring all sides together. It was watching Vic Atiyeh and his ability to create jobs for Oregon back in the 80s. It was watching Bob Packwood and seeing what he could do with tax policy and the brilliance he had with fiscal issues. And I looked at those people and I said, I want to be a Republican, because I love the way that they produce positive results for our state. And we need to return to that type of republicanism. And unfortunately, we've had some people who represent a different type of ideology, and I don't think that's healthy for our state.
How much support have you gotten so far from the National Republican groups, and are you worried that you're going to be a little bit outside of the Republican mainstream?
Well, first of all, everyone that I have spoken to from the Republican Party understands I am running for the 1st District of Oregon, perhaps one of the most eclectic districts in the entire country. For someone to be a 98% voter with their party, like some of my Democrat opponents are in the state legislature, or like my previous opponent, Mr. Wu, was in Congress, if I'm a 98%er, I'll be the Republican version of David Wu. And I don't think that's healthy for this district, and I think the Republican leadership understands that as well.
Let's take a quick call from Betty, who's called in from Beaverton. Betty, welcome to the show. Betty, you there?
When you are in Congress and a measure or a bill is up for vote, and your Republican leadership comes up to you, looks you in the eye, puts their arm around you and says, we need your support for this bill. And if you support us on this bill, when re-election time comes up, we can ensure that you get your slice of the pie. And you know this bill is counter to what you promised the voters now. How are you going to respond?
Betty, thanks for the question. Rob Cornilles in a couple seconds.
Very simply, Betty, I remember who I'm representing. I'm not running for John Boehner. I'm running for people like you, Betty. This is why 97% of my fundraising is coming from within the state of Oregon, not special interests, not lobbyists from Washington, D.C.
Rob Cornilles, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Dave.
Rob Cornilles is one of the Republicans running in the Republican primary for the 1st Congressional District, the special election happening right now. We're going to talk in just a second after a break to another one, Jim Greenfield. Stay tuned.
Support for Think Out Loud is provided in part by the Rosie Tucker Charitable Trust. If you have missed the first part of this morning's program, talking with Rob Cornilles, a candidate for in the Republican primary for the 1st Congressional District, you can hear that conversation in full tonight at 9 o'clock with our rebroadcast, or later this morning get a podcast of the show at opb.org/thinkoutloud. In news headlines we're following at OPB today, Multnomah County has become the first in the state to ban the sale of reusable plastic drink containers made with bisphenol A, or BPA. It covers drink bottles, as well as sippy cups and baby bottles. Also, officials in northeastern Oregon have identified the small plane pilot who was killed Wednesday night in a crash and the injured passenger who struggled across farm country to safety. Morrow County Sheriff's Deputy Lee Jeffries said yesterday the pilot was 65-year-old Stephen Lunsford of Driggs, Idaho. The passenger was his son-in-law, 37-year-old Jeffrey Smock of San Francisco. You can find details on these stories and more throughout the day on OPB Radio and at our website at opbnews.org. Stay with us coming up at 10 o'clock when we'll turn to Here and Now. More than 125 former professional football players have filed a lawsuit against the NFL and helmet maker Riddle, claiming the NFL should do more to warn current players about the dangers of head injuries and to help retired players suffering from them. But what about teen athletes whose undeveloped brains are even more at risk? Stay with us for that story coming up this morning at 10 with Here and Now. You're tuned to OPB in Portland and Oregon City at 91.5 FM, in Seaside at 96.3, and online at opb.org.
You're listening to Think Out Loud on OPB. I'm Dave Miller. If you're just joining us, we're talking today with two of the Republicans running in the primary for the 1st Congressional District's special election. Primary ballots were recently sent out. They're due by November 8th. Then the general election is just around the corner on January 31st. Before the break, we talked to Rob Cornilles. I'm joined now by Jim Greenfield. He's a commercial and residential real estate developer and investor, but he's had many jobs in the past, including running car dealerships and hosting political radio shows. Like Cornilles, this is his second time running for the 1st District. He lost to then Congressman David Wu in 2002. If you have questions for Jim Greenfield, our website is opb.org/thinkoutloud. Our phone number is 1-888-665-5865. Jim Greenfield, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm going to start one more time with Grover Norquist, second time in this hour we're going to mention his name. He famously said he didn't want to abolish government. He wanted to shrink it down to the size where he could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub. What is your dream for federal government?
I'd like to be there with Grover, helping to drown the government in the bathroom.
Holding it down.
Hold it down.
Okay.
And by the way, unlike Rob Cornilles, I did sign the No New Tax Pledge. I know you probably have at least a few Republican listeners.
We sure do.
Okay.
About as many as Democratic listeners.
Including me. I'm a regular listener.
Well, that's good to hear. But so back to the federal government.
Yes.
What do you want? Why do you want to shrink it down to bathtub dying size?
Well, the federal government now consumes 25% of GDP. That's the highest level in history. And just to put this in perspective, historically, for the first 150 years of the United States, the federal government only consumed 3% of GDP. So it's gone from 3% to 25%. And during that period, see, I take the long-term historical perspective. During that period when the federal government was very, very small, there was no income tax, there was no Federal Reserve, the government was very small.
No federal highway system, no
right.
air traffic controllers,
hang on, but the point is,
yeah.
If I can finish my thought, the point is that our economy was growing at 11% a year. That's when the United States went from being a small, unimportant nation to becoming to becoming the world's great economic powerhouse.
You're talking about like 1870s, 1880s, up to...
They started keeping the federal government started keeping records in 1870. So if you look from 1870 to 1915, not to get too much into ancient history, from 1870 to 1915, our economy was growing 11% a year, absorbing millions of immigrants from Europe, and that's when we had all of the great inventions, the telephone, the electric light bulb, with Edison, and the phonograph, and the Wright brothers created airplanes, and Henry Ford started manufacturing. So what I'm saying is, when the government is small, the private sector is bigger and grows much more rapidly and is much more dynamic.
So I want to take us back to the present, though. What that government is doing now, that the federal government is doing now, don't you want to do in the future?
Well, let's start with running up humongous deficits that they can never pay back. We now have $15 trillion in national debt, growing at $4 billion a day, and another $70 trillion in unfunded liabilities for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Our government is completely bankrupt. They have no prayer of being able to pay this debt back. And do you know what's going to happen, Dave, when interest rates go up? Right now, the government's paying about $300 billion a year on interest on the national debt. When interest rates get back up to normal levels, which eventually they will, that's going to rise to $700 or $800 billion. Where are they going to get that money?
What is your fix?
The fix is to shrink the federal government. The only way we can get our deficit, our problem of our national debt under control, is to start dramatically cutting federal programs. Obama says he wants to raise taxes on the rich, and he thinks that's going to solve the problem. No way is that going to solve the problem. Even if he raises the taxes on the rich, it won't even make a dent. It'll just bring in a tiny fraction of the amount of revenue that would be needed to get the debt problem under control.
You've written that you'd want to reduce and then eventually eliminate the departments of education, energy, housing and urban development, commerce, transportation, agriculture, labor, HHS. Interior too.
Yeah.
So a lot of these, some of them were started in the Carter administration. Some of them go back to much further. Lincoln established the Department of Agriculture in the 1860s. The Department of Commerce is over 100 years old.
Nobody's perfect.
But my question is, if one of the tenets of conservatism is sort of respect for tradition, respect for precedents, and sort of some kind of status quo, and maybe incremental changes to the world we live in now, as opposed to radical ones, how does this massive overturning of a lot of federal precedent fit in with a conservative idea of change?
Well, these terms, liberal and conservative, can get very confusing. And when conservatives say, oh, well, we don't want to change anything, what does that mean? That they want to preserve all the liberal programs that were created in the past? You mentioned the Department of Agriculture. What do we need a Department of Agriculture for? Do you think farmers need a federal agency to tell them how to grow food? I mean, maybe Tiger Woods needs a Department of Golf to tell them how to play golf. We don't need a Department of Agriculture. What do we need it for? But you could do that analysis with any of these departments.
So what are you left with in the federal government, in your dream version of federal government?
Well, I'd like to go back to a federal government that, to use Jefferson's term, is simple and frugal. Frugal, that means you don't spend a lot of money. So let's start with that. But I'd like to go back to my plan, the Jim Greenfield plan for restoring our economy and getting our debt under control is called, it's not actually my plan, it's called the United States Constitution.
And you listeners can't see, but you've just taken the pocket Constitution out of the inside of your sport coat.
That's right, I carry it with me for emergencies. This plan of government, of the Constitution, was designed as a plan of limited government. That's how the founding fathers, Madison and Hamilton, referred to it, as limited government, a government of delegated powers. If you look at the Constitution, see what powers are delegated to the federal government. By the way, a Department of Education, Agriculture, Energy Department, Housing and Urban Development, Health and Human Services, none of those are mentioned in the Constitution. So if you start going back to the constitutional original concept of limited government, that the government only has the powers actually delegated to it by the Constitution, you would end up getting rid of about 2/3 of what the federal government now spends money on.
You've signed a pledge to repeal Obama's, the administration's federal healthcare overhaul, to overhaul healthcare.
Is that okay with you if we call that Obamacare? Because that's how everybody knows it.
You can call it Obamacare. That's fine. It's a lot faster to say it that way, I suppose.
Yes, exactly.
Do you support any of the provisions in the law?
No.
insurers being prohibited from imposing lifetime dollar limits on benefits, dependents being able to stay on their parents' plan until they turn 26, that insurers now can't drop policyholders when they get sick.
Look, Dave, not a single Republican in Congress voted for Obamacare. If Rob Cornilles is elected...
That's a separate question.
I know,
I'm
but I'm
wondering
just saying,
if you
put it
support
in context.
any of these provisions.
No, I don't. I said I don't. Rob Cornilles will be the only... if he's elected, he'll be the only Republican in Congress who will not vote to repeal Obamacare. He's on the record saying that he wouldn't vote to repeal it.
He said that just a couple minutes ago, yes.
Yeah. So, no, I would get rid of the whole thing, throw it... Because, Rob wants to improve Obamacare. To me, that's like putting perfume on a skunk. You got a skunk living in your house, say, oh, I'll just put some perfume on it. No, you got to get the skunk out of the house. I don't want the government taking over healthcare. In fact, I want to go the opposite direction. The problem with our healthcare system is that the government is already massively intervening in it, and that's what created all the distortions. That's what's forced the cost of healthcare to go up at 3 times the rate of inflation. We need to reverse that process and start moving back towards a privatized, free enterprise healthcare system.
You've called the Columbia River crossing pork barrel spending. What's your definition of pork?
Well, one issue is when you have the federal government spending money on things that should be handled locally. And what people don't think about is that if your congressman is bringing pork home to your district, how's he getting that pork? What kind of corrupt deals is he making with other congressmen for them to take pork home to their districts? And then we, Oregonians, have to pay higher taxes to pay for the pork in other guys' districts? So if you say, well, I'm not going to play those games. I'm not going to try to bring pork home to my district, but I'm also going to vote to stop other congressmen from taking pork home to their districts. If you get enough people in Congress who think that way, you can end this corrupt practice and save the taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
And so, in your mind, whether there should be a bridge across the Columbia between Oregon and Washington, it should be purely a question in terms of how to pay for it, or to pay for it or not, between those two states.
Yeah, because if you have those decisions made at a federal level instead of a local and state level, you're going to end up spending much more for those projects. All the corruption comes in. The special interests who are making contributions to politicians in order to get the contracts to do those deals. You look at all the money that's been wasted with that kind of pork barrel corruption. No, we need to stop that. And if you have it done at the state level, it's much closer to the voters, and the voters are going to be keeping a closer eye on it, and will keep it under control. It's less likely to result in waste, fraud, and abuse.
The last time this district voted for a Republican and sent a Republican to Congress was 1972. I think. I'm pretty sure about that.
That was before I came to Oregon.
Okay. So, me too. What's your take on how do you categorize this district politically and where you fit in?
Well, I'm realistic, Dave. I mean, in the present boundaries of the first district, Democrats have a 12% advantage, okay?
That's registration-wise.
Registration-wise.
With many unaffiliated voters.
Yeah, that's the bad news for Republicans. The good news is that Democrats are demoralized because they've noticed that Obamonomics and liberal democratic socialist governmentalist spending policies don't work. And so more Democrats will stay home. Well, stay home doesn't work here because we have vote by mail. But more Democrats may not vote in as high numbers as Republicans. Republicans are more motivated. And we know that there was a special election in New York State in a district that had been in Democratic hands since the 1920s, and it went Republican. So we're hopeful that this time a conservative Republican like me could actually win this.
We found out in the course of preparing for the show that that your campaign missed an October 15th filing deadline for the Federal Elections Commission. Your campaign did file that a couple days
Correct.
later. What happened? How did it happen?
Oh, well, I called the FEC. They said there's an October 15th deadline. I had a compliance person lined up who then was unable to deal with the problem. And so I had to get a new compliance person who told me that actually the deadline was October 27th. And so there was a little bit of a miscommunication.
Which there is one for yesterday, which you did file for, but there was a separate one for the 15th.
Right.
Should voters be concerned about some kind of organizational competency?
Oh, if they want to be concerned with utter trivia that's totally irrelevant.
What I'm wondering, how is that irrelevant?
We've got a national debt of $15 trillion and another $70 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Our nation is bankrupt. We are at we've been in a recession for more than 4 years. Okay? Most recessions last 6 to 12 months. This isn't a recession. This is the decline of America. And I'm willing to take a stand to fight to turn this country around and solve that problem, which my opponent is not. Now, you want to look at that, or do you want to look at whether we had a little mix-up in our campaign and didn't get the filing thing done on time? It's filed. It's taken care of. Non-issue.
Let's move on to foreign policy. President Obama was criticized from the left, from people like Representative Kucinich, and also from the right, Speaker John Boehner. This is a number of months ago now, but for not getting congressional approval for military intervention in Libya that went on for over 6 months. Did you support that?
Well, Dave, you see, I don't actually even like to call myself a conservative. I like to call myself a limited government constitutionalist. And the Constitution is pretty clear. Congress has the power to declare war. The president carries out that declaration, but Congress is supposed to be declare war. And I don't just have a problem with Libya. I got a problem with Iraq and Afghanistan. I was on the air in 2002 vociferously arguing against invading Iraq. And I had a pretty conservative audience. They used to get mad at me. But I don't think the United States should be going around invading and occupying foreign countries unless they've attacked us. And so my approach to fighting Islamic extremism is to infiltrate terrorist organizations, bring down the leadership, either capture them or kill them, and destroy those organizations.
Is that basically what the Obama administration is doing now?
Well, they are doing that in part, and their drone strikes have been effective, and I support that. But if we weren't in Afghanistan, we wouldn't be destabilizing Pakistan. We're creating terrorists in Pakistan a lot quicker than we're killing them in Afghanistan. And we're destabilizing a country in Pakistan, which is about 6 times as big as Afghanistan, and has 150 nuclear weapons. This is insane. We may throw Pakistan into the arms of Islamic extremists, who will then control their nuclear arsenal. And why are we doing that? To fight a war against the Taliban in Afghanistan that's really none of our business. I didn't mind invading Afghanistan after September 11th, but that was 10 years ago. It only took us 4 years to beat the Nazis. Why are we still in Afghanistan?
Jim Greenfield, we're going to leave it with that question lingering in the air. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Very good questions. It was a good interview.
Jim Greenfield is a real estate investor and one of the Republicans running in the special election for the 1st Congressional District's special election. The ballots are out now. Get them in if you're a Democrat or Republican in the district. Get them in by November 8th. You're listening to Think Out Loud on OPB. In just a minute, we're going to ask why the theories about who wrote Shakespeare's plays